Welcome back to our real estate investor series with Realty Consultants Property Management. I have Jason Coleman with Amplify Real Estate with me today. Jason, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Jason Coleman, and I'm a real estate investor agent out of the Triad. And I run Amplify Real Estate.
Awesome. Jason's a good friend of mine, and as you know, we kind of have investors come on here and give some tips to those, tell kind of what they're doing, and just kind of anything that we can do to help, especially people early in their time in investing to help them get them going. So, tell me a little bit about yourself, Jason, and your business.
So I consider myself an investor first. I got my license as really just try to save 3% on the commissions, and then ended up really enjoying the agent side of the business and love helping people get into their first investment property or build their portfolio. But yeah, I'm out there just hunting for deals all the time, full-time real estate investor, but with that agent piece attached. I think they're pretty I think they sync up very well to each other, and they're just symbiotic, if you will.
Right.
So I focus on acquiring, funding properties, and helping other investors get into properties that work.
Cool. What did you do before your time in real estate?
Yeah, I had a healthcare gig. I was a lab rat and a lab salesman for about a decade. So dermatopathology, like dermatology. Yeah, lab stuff, sales on the lab end, and kind of built up my sales background. And yeah, I mean, we can get into that a little bit on the story side, but
Yep.
like that was kind of my before real estate hit me in the face.
Gotcha. So what actually got you in real estate? What was that one thing that was
Oh
like, man,
yeah.
I want to go do this?
Oh man, a great story. I had this cushy W-2 job that I thought was going to be a career gig. I busted my tail and worked for this startup lab. Really invested emotionally with this company, mentally, physically, worked my tail off. One day went into work and they fired me.
Oh, wow.
Just took the rug right out from underneath of me. At the time, it was the end of the world situation. I was completely blindsided. Director of sales, big deal. Like this was it for me for the next 20 years. And that was when I realized that the W-2 stable, secure job was not that. And I went home, had my couple months of what am I going to do with my life. My wife and I had just bought our first house. This was 5 years ago, 6 years in March. And after about 3 months, started listening to Bigger Pockets, started reading Rich Dad Poor Dad, read the real estate investment books, and I told my wife, I said, look, I need 5 years, right? We're gonna move. I've been learning about real estate, but I need 5 years. Stuff's gonna be weird. We're gonna jump into real estate head first, but in 5 years, nobody is gonna control that paycheck over top of us ever again. We're gonna have enough cash flow. We're gonna be able to live without whatever, right? And sure enough, that's really what happened. So it was really the worst thing. I remember a friend of mine said, you're going to look back when I got fired, she was like, hey, you're going to look back and realize this was the best thing that ever happened to you. And in the moment, I remember being like, you don't know what you're talking about. I just poured my heart and soul into this business, this, healthcare business. And then it did turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to me because I realized it's not as secure as I wanted. And then real estate was this new path that I just doubled down on, that became truly inspired on, all right, well, I don't have to work for 30, 40 years of my life and then die, like
Right.
it just was like, all right, we can build this out and live the life of our dreams in a very short period of time if we just do these methodical steps to get to that. So,
Yeah. So
yeah.
were you at all looking into this before then, or was this just like, hey, rugs pulled out from under me, I got to figure out something to do, and then miraculously something along the real estate end came your way?
We were living well below our means. We are never the keeping up with the Joneses type. My wife and I are really unified on that front. Like we were living below our means and like, hey, we're going to retire in our like early 60s type thing. We were thinking, let's save 10, 15, 20% of our income, put in S&P 500. That was like our path, like regular index fund investing. No idea. I knew nothing about real estate. When I started Rich Dad Poor Dad, listening to the podcast, we turned our first house that we had ever bought into a rental. We actually moved to Wilmington. That was in Greensboro, 2017, I think we bought it. We moved to Wilmington for a short bit to work for another lab to kind of make ends meet, do that thing for a couple years, really about a year and a half. That's when we turned our first house into a rental, realized we were managing ourselves, like, hey, we can do this, and hey, this makes sense. Like, the property's paying for itself, paying for the repairs and whatnot, and slowly appreciating. Well, let's do this again. Bought it. Then we ended up buying a flip house. Then ended up buying another owner occupant house that we lived in for a year. Then turned into a rental. So we started small, like baby steps like that at first, and then we ended up moving back here to Greensboro. We still have that one rental in Wilmington, but I knew nothing about real estate. And then I just poured into, podcasts, YouTube. I mean, you can learn anything you want to on podcasts, such as this. Like, you really can. And I think a lot of people they seem to think we don't have, I don't know, a lot of people think they don't have the resources. And I'm like, I've learned, my confidence was built. I had a couple mentors along the way that have truly helped me out for sure. But that confidence started with podcasts, like reading the books and saying, hey, this is weird. I know this is going to be, like, we're going to be landlords. My wife, thought I was crazy, and it was a big pipe dream for about 3 out of that 5 years. And then she started realizing, oh, okay, this is really starting to catch up. Cash flow is catching up. The houses are appreciating, and whoa, it starts snowballing very quickly. So just the first deal, I say this all the time, like, the first deal is the hardest one, just getting into it, like kind of clicking that over in our mind of like, let's turn our house into a rental was a very difficult jump. But if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be here today. Right. We wouldn't be anywhere near the same financial stability that we have now.
Right. So fast forward to today.
Yeah.
Your portfolio that you have, or the type of investing you like to do, you have long-term holds, you have short-term kind of flips, that kind of stuff. Tell us about what your business looks like from that standpoint.
Sure. So we now have 29 doors. Most of those are single family. We do have a duplex in there. We have 4 short-term rentals. 4 out of those 29 are short-term rentals. Those are 3 of them are like little 2-bed, 1-bath short-term rentals near downtown. And then
when you say short-term rental, you talking about like Airbnb?
Airbnbs.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and we have like short-term rentals and like medium-term rentals they call, or mid-term rentals. We shop for sometimes travel nurses or people that are staying here for more than 30 to 90 days. We shop for those as well. When I say shop, just kind of finding a tenant that can secure that short-term lease or medium-term lease. Yeah, and we have a couple actually room for rentals that I don't consider like those by the door. We have a little development play on the side that we're working on right now that we've acquired, and we do have a little property manager that's doing the room for rent stuff. That is very difficult. It's not our bread and butter. Our bread and butter when it comes to acquisitions is really like, we're pretty crazy about seller financing. That's how we've acquired most of our real estate. And 29 doors, and we're at about $4.5 million in value now. Okay. So we're just continuing to build off of that, paying down these loans over time, and yeah.
Let's talk about the. You mentioned seller financing as one of your favorite ways to do the financing on these deals. So talk to me about how you decided to do that, where you found the seller financing, and things of that nature.
Yeah, I'm crazy about seller financing. Funny enough, at my financial literacy group, I did a presentation on that specifically last night, because seller financing it's a mutually beneficial deal for both the buyer and the seller if you do it correctly. Mm-hmm. Not every seller is going to go for seller financing, not even close, right? 80% of them are going to turn it down, but most of my sellers are what I call my buy box, are 60, 70, 80-year-old property owners. They typically own more than one property. They own them outright. They're used to the investment game. They're very used to the cash flow that real estate provides. They're just done with being a landlord. Mm-hmm. So I show up and I say, well, most of these people have not raised the rents for a very long time. So I can show up, and we have a deal that we closed back in January where the tenant was paying $725 a month in rent. Market rent was about $1,100 a month. Well, I feel comfortable paying her $750 a month if I'm putting no money down at a decent interest rate where she's making a return, and now the seller is making more money than the tenant was even paying without the headaches, right? So I find these deals, like, Really, my biggest deals I've actually found from door knocking. My best deals, my largest portfolio to date that we acquired was through a door knocking campaign where tried to flip this one guy's house. He introduced me to a lady. He said, the numbers didn't work. And he introduced me to this lady who ended up having 20, 30 properties. And I ended up buying a good portion of those and selling a few. This is what I like about the agent thing. Real quick plug on the agent side is like agents, I call it a wealth creation superpower, because what I've done time and time again with portfolio sellers specifically is, hey, let me sell a third of your portfolio on market, maybe a third off market, direct to buyer, and then I'll acquire the last third, seller financing. I'll save you a bunch in taxes. They get a big cash boost by selling the rest, 2/3 of their portfolio. They don't need the cash. They just want a steady stream of cash flow that's secured by an asset that they already are familiar with. So I consider, the agent game is great because I shop for those portfolio sellers, and then I'm like, this is my business, this is my bread and butter. I sell portfolios and I acquire some or all of that portfolio. And I've done this time and time again. Here are 5, 6 seller lenders that you can call for references. I've never missed a payment once, and kind of build that rapport until, if it's mutually beneficial, the seller will typically say, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, and I think because I've done a few of those myself, I think sellers don't realize the tax advantages that come along with that as well.
Yeah. So, the scenario I ran last night at our meetup was, somebody sells a $500,000 house or a portfolio that's worth about $500,000, and it's an investor, right? They're typically going to have to pay about 150 grand worth of taxes on that, right? The depreciation catches up to them. So at the end of the day, they pay the commissions, but at the end of the day, they're probably left with like $320,000, right? And now they have to invest it into the stock market or a savings account or a certificate of deposit or whatever, right? And they're making a small return. Again, these people are 60, 70, 80 years old. They want a secure return. Well, I can show up and say, I'll pay you market rate for those properties. Now you don't have to take a $150,000 pay cut. I'll keep paying you based on that market value, and you can really split up that tax bill over time. And eventually, we set the terms, the balloon payment, how long the amortization schedule and whatnot to make it work out where, especially with portfolios, what I'll typically do is pay off, if I buy 6 properties at a time, I'll pay off the first 2 in 5 years, the second 2 in 6 years, the third 2 in, 7 years to kind of break up that tax hit even more. And sellers, they realize that they're able to hang on to that $150,000 that they were just going to give to the government, right? And a lot of our sellers, they don't ever really want to get paid off. They just want the monthly check. They have enough money in their bank account. They just want a steady stream of cash flow.
All right, so we're talking about the seller financing here. Where do you make up the difference? Where do you make your money? You're paying the seller essentially, basically, almost like what they were making before. Where do you make up the difference?
Right. So hypothetically, if there's a $200,000 deal, market value is 200 grand. If I were to buy that property and use a regular conventional loan, an investment loan, I'd have to bring 20 to 25% down to buy that property. I'd have to bring $50,000 of my own cash plus closing costs and whatnot to buy that property. With a seller finance deal, I can work out the terms typically between 0 to 5% down worth of a down payment, because the more I typically tell the sellers, like, you don't actually want me to put 20 to 25% down in this deal because you're going to have to pay taxes on that 20, 25%. Again, they have enough cash in their account. They don't really need the cash. So I come to them and I can bring 0 down, and we have purchased, over 15 properties at this point with no money out of our pocket. I get to keep that $50,000. Now, the cash flow is a little bit more neutral. It definitely does not cash flow as much as it would be if I had a regular loan with 20% down, 20% equity day one, but I get to keep my reserves in place. Typically what I'll do is I'll upfit the property a little bit more, a little bit of forced equity. So then when I refinance 5 years down the road, the property already has 25% worth of equity. And when I refinance, I don't have to bring any more cash to the table. So essentially the return, take that $200,000 property, I bring 50 grand to the table in a conventional loan, and that property appreciates by, call it 5% for easy math, right? 5%, that property appreciated by $10,000. If I had to bring 50 grand to the table, I only made 20% back on that money. If I'm bringing no money down, the return on that $10,000 is technically infinite, right? I can scale my portfolio much faster using seller financing. And again, it's mutually beneficial. I'm able to scale and the seller is sitting there collecting a check every single month, secured by an asset that they already understand.
Gotcha. So how I've done a couple of these as well, like I said, but one of the ways we were able to do it was to raise the rents. We found that
Yep.
sellers typically are not doing that,
They're not.
especially the ones they've held for so long. So does
Yep.
does that come as an opportunity?
That's pretty much 90% of the time. So the 60, 70, 80-year-old landlord, they have tenants in place. I've bought properties where the tenant's been in place for over 20 years, right? And they haven't raised the rent in the last 10 years,
Right.
15 years, right? I can typically come in and say, hey, I'll pay you more than what that tenant's paying. And then within a few months, let alone a year, I can get the rents up to closer to market rent. What I'll typically do is work it out with the tenants and say, hey, I'm buying at 2023 prices. Here's my payment. I expose everything. I'm very like transparent on that front where I say, well, here's my payment to the seller. Here's my taxes. Here's my insurance. The AC just went out. These are all the bills that I have to end up paying for. I can't pay the seller $500 a month and the rent's only $550 a month. Like that's not how this is going to work long term. I'm either going to have to sell the property, offload it. Like I'm just not going to be able to hang on to this property. So some tenants will just leave. They'll give their notice and they'll I can't bump up $200 a month in rent, which for me is fine because that $500 current rent, really so many times the market rent is $800 a month, $900 a month. So I can come in and with minimal rehab, within 30, 60, 90 days, I can bump the rent up to $800, $900 a month. Now I've not only bought the property with no money down, I'm able to afford paying the seller every single month, first of the month, really in perpetuity until that balloon payment rolls up. And now I'm making an extra $300, $400 a month, which brings up my cash flow significantly.
Right.
Yeah.
Switch gears a little bit. So you mentioned that you have somebody that helps you with your short terms.
Yes.
So I'm assuming you do your own property management on your other ones.
So yes, for the most part, we do have a property manager that manages a few of our rentals, but the vast majority of them are actually managed by my wife.
Okay.
So she has been the 5 years thing. I said, look, in 5 years, we're not going to have a paycheck. We're not going to need a paycheck, right? That's going to be organic. It's just going to be coming in every single month. A year ago, my wife, her anniversary of leaving her job was last week, right? So she actually retired from her gig. She was a teacher, Primrose, like daycare, director of daycare there, which was great for the time. She was in that for about a decade. She was able to leave that position because we had enough cash flow to sustain that. We were able to absorb the property management for all of our properties, save on the property management fee. Property management, it's tough. I always say property managers are, good ones are great, but no property manager is going to manage it like you do, right? Because they don't own it. The investment there is not there the same. She's more systems, operations. She's organized. I am not organized. I can talk to people all day long. I can call, I can make a million phone calls and I can find the deals. She is the operation side. So she started managing all of our properties. And then in the last few years, we've actually gotten into the short-term rental game. I met at the Bigger Pockets conference, I met a woman by the name of Sarah Weaver, who she operates a bunch of short-term rentals, has built those up, and she actually was a consultant on our first short-term rental. So I was thinking at the time, this was like 2.5 years ago, I guess at this point, I was like, all right, I want to get into the short-term rental game. I want to increase our cash flow a little bit. Also, we really like the transformation of properties. We like renovating and we like making them better. Again, we get more appreciation, more equity on that side, more cash flow. But I really wanted to get into the short-term rental game. So I actually hired her and flew her in. This was funny enough. It was the house our very first house that we turned into a long-term rental. We moved to Wilmington. We moved back into that house for a short bit. Then we renovated it and turned it into a short-term rental after we moved out. So we moved out of the property. We hired Sarah to come in. She furnished the property on our dime. She set up the manual, all the systems, the calendar. She hooked it up to Vrbo, Airbnb, all the platforms, chalked us through and gave us a full manual on how to operate a short-term rental. And that short-term rental was in operation in 2 weeks.
Wow.
After we left. So a lot of people, I mean, I paid her, I'm not embarrassed to say it. I paid her about 10 grand to come in. Now, the furnishings were on top of that. We had done the renovations before she came in ourselves. So the house was painted, new flooring, new kitchen. It was a great property once we moved out. And I paid her 10 grand. It was in operation in 2 weeks, and it paid for itself within a few months. Wow. Versus me having to do that myself and my wife by herself, or us together. It would have taken months for us to figure out how to really put this in operation. And it would have been a trial and error situation. Like, we wouldn't have been able to operate it the way that Sarah came in and operated it. So then my wife was able to absorb all those systems for a fee. We became super hosts within 90 days, right on 90 days. It's been cash flowing ever since. And then we were able to take the template that Sarah provided for us, and we just copied it for the next one, then the next one, then the next one. And I mean, that it was worth, I would have paid triple of that just to like have all the systems in place day one. And we wouldn't have had to I think a lot of clients, I think a lot of people getting into the Airbnb space think, oh, it's easy. I could just just text here and there and get the cleaning crew. No, if you don't take it seriously, you're not going to make the money. And we were able to automate 80% of our systems. So my wife, it doesn't take her much time at all. She maybe spends 3-4 hours a week on the Airbnb side of our business. And that would not have been, I think it would have taken us a year plus to get to that point. So we have a better product. It operates better. It cash flows better. We're super hosts. We have all the reviews now. I mean, like it's a really cool, the short-term rental space is really cool. And they're better looking. They're just, they get cleaned all the time. I could sell it in a second. If something were to happen, we could just turn around and sell it. And yeah, it's just been really, that side of the business has been really cool. It's like a shiny product versus like your long-term rentals are like, kind of set it and forget it.
Right.
Less manual, but I think it's a balance between like stronger cash flow and just kind of like automated long-term rentals.
Right. That's what's so cool about this business, the real estate investment business, because at the end of the day, I feel like we all want to help each other. Just like we're doing this series, we do our podcast, the Raising Real Estate Standards podcast. We just want to get information out there to help people because, like for myself, I feel like I've been blessed. Yeah. So I just want to share the blessing with others. So good for her for like coming in, helping you set that up, because I've heard so many people that try to go in the short-term rental game and they get started and then either they're just so overwhelmed or their business model's just junk to begin with.
Right.
So, and then they're out. So
there.
But all right, I want to switch gears one more time. So tell me about, we're going into the future here.
Okay.
Tell me about Jason's goals. Tell me about what your end game is in the investment world.
Man, this is very like timely because I'm very goal oriented. That definitely helps me motivate. But what has happened with the 5-year goal put so much fire under me to get to really make that vision come to life, right? And this year, long story short, we've actually had some pretty like significant like personal struggles this year that have happened where luckily, again, I feel very fortunate. I'm very grateful for what has happened in our life, that what we have like dedicated our time and effort to is really paying off at this point. We recently have been able to I just got my knee replaced. Like I'm able to take downtime, and our goals now, we're actually refocusing that. Like literally last week, we just sat down, reviewed our bucket list, reviewed what does this look like, especially with her being more in the business now. And we have I've got a 4-year-old daughter. How much more family time? What kind of trips are we looking at? Our big goal now is we're actually looking to take a 6-month RV unplugging trip March 4th.
Nice.
Or excuse me, March 1st of 2024. That's always been our goal. Like the RV trip for an extended period of time has been our goal. But like now, my daughter will be 5 then. We have the ability to do that. Like, again, I'm extremely fortunate. I've had some people that are like, dude, you're just going to like stop the business for 6 months, like in the prime real estate market. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to get, I heard this crazy statistic, and this is like, I'm more goal oriented on like the family side right now than I ever have been. It's something like, I heard this crazy statistic that's like, by the time your kid is 16 or 18 years old, you've spent like 80% of the time that you'll ever spend with them. It might be more than that. And by the time they're like in their 20s and on, you're only going to have another like 10-15% of like really face to face, like bonding time and whatnot. So like my daughter's going to be 5. She's a third of the way there to 16. I'm not going to have many opportunities like this. And I'm okay with just, it's not pulling the plug. We still have that passive income. We still have referral money. I could probably still, I'm going to set this up in a way where I could still list houses remotely. I'll still probably do some of my job on the road, but we're taking this time. Our big goal now is March 1st, springtime, and we've got our little route set up of like, we're getting an RV and we're just going to go see what America has to offer. Landscape, restaurants, food, all that. So that would not have been possible if we didn't have that main goal initially to like, we need to build up, not the amount of doors. Like I think a lot of people are like, oh man, at 29 doors, like that's all well and good, but how much cash flow is actually getting spit out from those doors? How much can you tap into that equity? And, you know, we're either considering, you know, we have a few houses that we own outright now. I'm either going to refinance and pull some money out of those to then pay for our trip, pay for the RV, pay for the trip for 6 months, or maybe sell them depending on what happens. You can get a HELOC now. I found an investment property bank that'll do like HELOCs on investment properties. So that is like our big family goal. As far as the business, I don't want to say struggling. I think a lot of people in this industry, I think in entrepreneurship, I think we all get sucked into, well, double your numbers, right? And I consider, I'm playing a different game. I really am. I really cherish the time. You know, I didn't get to see my dad a lot growing up. And I know that my wife and I see our daughter, we're very likely in the top 1%, at least 5% of the population on the time we get to spend with our kid. That is such a huge part of what really bonds us, brings it like, that's what motivates me, is I refuse to spend 12-hour days, 13 hours a day. Like I can make more money if I do that. Can I make an extra $100,000 a year if I work, bend over backwards, work weekends and do all these appointments and whatnot? But like, I feel again, very grateful, fortunate that I can have that foresight of like, when she's 16, when she's 18 and out of the house, I'm not gonna be sitting there thinking like, man, I'm glad I made an extra $100,000 back in 2023, 2024, right? The fact that we're able to do this and take the time to like, hey, I mean, we pick her up early, we take her on trips, like we have extended weekends, and with my wife not being a part of that 9 to 5, again, we're living a life that we've designed here over time. It takes time, but if you methodically, I mean, you buy one property a year, 2 properties a year, and within 10 years, within 5 years, like it's a game-changing situation. It really is. Let alone if you really double down on the agent acquisition, seller financing, use the tools and strategies that are right there for the taking, you can truly amplify your life in a way that I did not think was even possible 5 years ago.
Yeah, so I mean that's awesome, and it's so awesome the way you blend your family and your business together like that. I mean, it's just amazing. I love that stat. I've never heard that stat, but I love that stat, and it makes sense because I've always been told, you know, our kids are on lease to us from God for like 16 to 18 years, which goes right along with your stat. And then it's our job to, you know, make them good people in that amount of time. And then at the end, they're on their own to do their own thing. So good for you for doing that. Good for you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Jason, for being with us today. We got a couple more segments we're going to do with you, and I really look forward to unpacking your story and talking about stuff like that. So thank you for being with us today again.
Thanks for having me.